Hi, everyone. I'm Annabelle Udo O'Malley. I'm the Programs Director for the Center for Architecture and Design and AIA San Francisco. Welcome to the Center for Architecture and Design. We opened our doors last year in September at the kickoff of the 20th anniversary of the Architecture in the City Festival. We were upstairs on the 6th floor, for anybody who remembers. It was an office space on the 6th floor. And so we are so happy to be here street level and storefront as we activate the spaces of San Francisco streets. As you know, we are in the historic Halliday building, designed by architect Willis Polk and named in honor of San Francisco cable car pioneer Andrew Halliday. It was opened in 1918 and is credited as one of the pioneering structures in the United States with a glass curtain wall. With our storefront cafe and the center street level presence, we have already been manifesting what we had one point envisioned, that is bringing new energy to the streets of San Francisco and being a vibrant hub for architects, designers, and enthusiasts alike to delve into the world of architecture together. We have several other upcoming programs that aim to show architects and the general public that design excellence and climate solutions go hand in hand, such as this year's AIA San Francisco Home Tours program, which takes place on Saturday, September 21, and showcases an open house format with 5 homes on one Saturday. So participants will have the opportunity to see some of the region's latest projects from the inside out, meet design teams, explore housing trends, and discover design solutions that inspire unique ways of living. This year, AIA San Francisco is encouraging all-electric project submissions, and we're hoping to feature a project or projects that might have, for example, fully electric induction kitchens or electric heat pump mechanical systems, to name a few of some of the technologies being adopted and mandated by local jurisdictions as a standard in low carbon, high efficiency homes. So please visit aiasf.org. The call for submissions is open now. Big thanks to everyone here, Emily, Charlie, the COAT team. Thank you so much for bringing really good programs to our new space. We hope you enjoy more programs like this. Please visit aiasf.org or centersf.org. With that, I'll pass the mic to Charlie Stott. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, Annabelle. This is great. And welcome, everyone. My name is Charlie Stott. I'm co-chair of the Committee on the Environment. And Mark, I don't think is here tonight. He's my co-chair. He's not in the back there. No, he couldn't make it tonight. And we head up the Committee on the Environment here at AIASF. Oh, AIASF. There you go. That's better. Also known as COAT. I'm excited to join you all tonight, all of you, and to take a deep dive into the world of designing for equity, tonight's program. Our guests this evening will give us a peek into a just and equitable design process, showing us how interactive outreach and deeper understanding of our community is a critical component to getting design right and design excellent. Tonight's program is a partnership between COAT and the AIASF. I'd like to give a big shout out to the AIASF staff who supports us in this and makes these events exceptional. Annabelle, who's now back at her job here, I want to really call you out as being the sort of tops of my docket here for thanks, because it's really been a great transition to this new facility and supporting us at the work we do at COAT. So a brief bit about the Committee on the Environment, which I'm co-chair of. COAT also, we welcome architects and allied professionals to join in our efforts to educate and advocate for all things sustainable and equitable in the built environment. Log on to aiasf.org to check out upcoming calendar events and activities. On the COAT committee page of the aiasf.org site, you'll find information on our monthly meetings and recordings of past events from some of our programs. We meet every third Tuesday at 11:30 for our monthly meetings, and you just missed today's. So this is the third Tuesday of the month, but we'll have another again next month. And just as a note keeping for anybody who needs to do this, the program is registered for AIA continuing education credits, and today's course qualifies for 1.5 AIA continuing ed units. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our moderator tonight, who's sitting next to me in our program Designing for Equity. New Parks Prioritize the Community. Lydia Lee is a Bay Area journalist with a focus on architecture and design. She's been an editor at California Home and Design, the Architect's Newspaper, and Remodelista, and writes regularly for a variety of design publications, including Architectural Record, Contract, and Metropolis. But here's the best part of this introduction. Lydia also serves as her local bicycle commission, on her local bicycle commission, and she manages not one, but two beehives. Well, maybe not at the moment, but often when they're healthy. So she's really a true community leader heading up this conversation tonight. So please provide a warm welcome to Lydia and our group tonight, who will introduce the program and tonight's stellar cast of characters. Thank you all.
All right. All right. So welcome everyone. It's great to see everyone here. As I was on my way here, I was thinking about parks, and at the risk of saying something blasphemous at the Center for Architecture and Design, how parks are like this embodiment of like all the best of what we aspire to in society. You know, how we welcome anyone who comes by. We support our young people. We sort of support our older people. We support wildlife and biodiversity, and we pool our resources together for the common good. And now also, you know, they're a force for social equity and environmental justice. So just a, you know, yay parks. And so tonight we have this, you know, special opportunity to go behind the scenes and hear how India Basin in San Francisco and Mosswood Park in Oakland were designed with this equity lens, and find out what worked and hopefully, you know, what not to do, and how this might be the way that we all design going forward. So to just so the program is going to go, we're going to have a panel discussion. Oh, we're going to have short presentations from each design team, and then we'll have a panel discussion with everyone, and then we'll have time for Q&A so that you can satisfy your curiosity as well. And we have so many people on the panel because we have representatives not only from the design teams, but also from the owners and from the community representatives. So we've got, you know, everybody here. So this is a great chance to ask questions. All right, so I'm going to kick things off by handing it off to the Mosswood team.
Thank you so much. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Sarah Keel, and I'm with Einwiller Keel Landscape Architecture, and it's actually really nice to see so many friendly faces in the audience. I want to introduce my team. This was a very special project. Some projects have that moment where you come together as a community of people doing something, as well as working in community with the community. And so Charmin Roundtree Bakey, Christine Reed, and Dominique are part of our larger team, but each one of them brings an important perspective. Charmin, both in terms of public art and community engagement, Christine for the city of Oakland, and she is also a landscape architect, which I think made a difference, and Dominique as the architect. And so with that, I'll dive in. It's really an honor to be here and to get to talk about this work. And I see this as a work in progress. It's not finished. We didn't achieve equity, but we are working on it. And I think we made some good strides and we learned a lot along the way. Next slide. I want to acknowledge that there are many, many, many people, some in this room. I see you, Ryan. I see you, Gretchen. I see others who are a part of this, not necessarily in an official capacity, but as part of the community. Terry, who was the center director, people from DPW. It takes everyone to make this happen. And so even though we're speaking and telling the story, I want it to be very clear we could not have done this without the larger group. Next slide. We got the honor of doing a project in Oakland. Oakland is this wonderfully, wonderfully special place and community with a long history. And our project site is next to hospitals. It's near MacArthur BART, and it's cut off by the 580 freeway. It's about 11 acres of green in a relatively dense and developed area. Next slide. The thing that's unusual about the project is it actually is a park and was a park before we started and had a long history of being a successful park before we started. And so it's known for both passive recreation and active recreation, but more so by a canopy of trees that surrounded it. So if you're playing basketball or having a picnic, you're surrounded by beautiful old trees. Next slide. In 2016, in November, due to arson, the existing 1953 building was burned to the ground. This was the Junior Center for Arts and Sciences. It was, in 1953, the idea of STEM for kids and arts together. Very interesting to see it cycle around again. And there was a lot of activism in the community to rebuild the center and make sure it got built back well and in this location. Next slide. When we started the project, this is what it looked like. This is a site plan, and you'll see that there's a series of portables just north of the tennis court that were in the location of the burn facility. And why it's good to have a landscape architect at the helm is she said, let's not just put up a building, let's think back on this 11 acres and what it could be or should be, and where should you put the building and why should you put it there, and what else does the park need to make it whole. And so we got an extra 10 months to do programming before we really started design, which we know was a great gift to the process and to the community. Next slide. When we were doing this work, Oakland had rolled out a beta of this toolbox. This is the Geographic Equity Toolbox, and it allows you to look at equity data in a spatial form. And it then turned into the official toolbox in about 2020. And what it shows is that our park site is right at the edge of places that are at very high risk or high risk and extremely low risk. And so it's an important place in the city and a place to think about equity, but not in a way where you treat everyone on all sides equally and not in a way that isn't informed by what came before. So next slide. This is a map showing urban displacement from the same toolkit and gentrification. So what you're seeing in the yellow is gentrification coming in from the north and displacement of people in very high income. And then the darker the purple color is, the more at risk of gentrification the area is. And so we began to think of a way to do engagement for the project that wasn't based on, well, you live within a mile of the park or next to the park, but how do you do engagement in a situation where you acknowledge the displacement? And there's a word I really love called propinquity, which has to do with nearness, but it's both physical nearness, but also psychological nearness or kinship. And there's a ton of people who have memories and history in this park who may no longer live next to it, but still want to come here, want it to hold their memories, want it to hold their events and other things. And so we had to think of a way to do outreach that worked. Next slide. Our outreach then was both local and regional, and we were looking at places that would help pull back those memory and make sure people who felt propinquity to this place could access our process. Next slide. We did a whole bunch of things in terms of how to get outreach. We did online things, we did print things. I want to call out the top right. We went out to other people's events, and I think this is something a lot of people are doing, but we went to the Black Eyed Peas festivals, we went to the Urban Peace Movement, we went to the Black Joy Parade. We made sure that we made it really easy to participate and particularly focused on groups that may have been relocated from nearby the park. Next slide. I like to say when you do a project like this, manners matter. And I think project management is manners. It's respect, and it's showing people that you care about their time, you care about communication. And this was designed so that we could cycle back in looping. So if you join the process later, you would still know what happened and where you were going. Next slide. And we also started by thinking about where we had come from. When we started the project, the historic group came and talked to us and said, there's a history here. And they said, there's the Moss House, and it's a Carpenter Gothic, and it's very important. And it was a focus on the history that was in the house. And it's an incredible house, and there's a lot of work being done. I don't know if Anna's here to try to save it. But there are other histories. Next slide. So as part of our work, we did a deeper dive after many conversations with people in the community, and I'd like to cite in particular Cassandra Lopez, known to the project team as Mama C, who talked a lot about the history of what happened in the park. There's incredible site-specific Black Panther history here. There's a history of the freeway cutting across it, and there's the history of Hook Mitchell, who could dunk a basketball over the car, and this was a great part of events that happened in the park. So there's a social history that was important to equity. Next slide. And in our work, we used both of those history, both a physical history of a house and a social history of what people did here for resilience, and put them together to tell what we've been calling the incomplete history as a way to start with a welcoming space to have the conversation about what to save, what needed to be repaired, what needed to change, and then use that in a scavenger hunt for kids during the process to tell the story about the ecology, to tell the story about the place. And with that, I'll pass to Dominique.
Thanks, Sarah. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the strategies that we use to create a meaningful process and how that fed into the outcomes and the design. So one of our kind of main strategies was to really create a very creative and engaging process that was hands-on, where folks were allowed to create artifacts that sort of fed back into the repository of the design. In this case, collages were made by the community early on to think through visioning for the site and thinking through desired pathways through the park. What you see at the bottom left is a treasure hunt site walk that we did with the community, talking through this special history and these kind of sacred spaces in the park before talking about kind of site challenges and opportunities. Another sort of really important factor of our design process was a very dedicated stakeholder group or cohort that came together and really showed up every Saturday and participated in the workshop process from beginning to end. I would say, you know, to Sarah's point and the plan that she shared earlier, that was really facilitated by having a very clear engagement plan that was developed and communicated very early on, so folks knew how they could plug into that timeline. It was created by showing sort of respect for people's time and value for people's time, thinking through schedule, providing food at all of the workshops. We had raffles at every workshop with prizes at the end. And we also wanted to create a really kind of intergenerational, multi-generational experience and really elevate youth voices to the same level as adult voices. So all of our activities were really made to allow for equal and substantive participation by youth and adults, oftentimes working together in collaborative teams. We reported back to the community at the beginning of every meeting what we had heard at the previous meeting. We clearly communicated how community input and ideas were being translated into the next steps in the process. What you see here is site plan overlays to show where there was sort of consensus starting to being built around the location for the potential buildings and the park elements. And then I would say that most importantly, what we did was formalize a series of kind of themes and values that kept on coming up throughout the community process into a series of guiding principles and values for the master plan. So you can see them outlined here. That's really, and kind of, you know, harkening back to what Sarah was saying, focusing on the rich social history of the site, really celebrating the inherent natural ecology of the park, creating space for this really lively community energy and creativity, and then also promoting community resiliency and sustainability to really think through how this site could continue to thrive for the next 100 years. And what you see at the top of this slide are icons that relate these themes back to social equity goals that we wove through the master plan. So here is our cover sheet of our master plan document. At the very beginning of our master plan document, we list the racial equity goals that were developed through the community design process. And those are kind of categorized in these different buckets. There's advancing education, improving public health, fostering neighborhood and civic life. And those are informed by work that was also being done by the City of Oakland's Department of Race and Equity to create a framework at the time for moving forward, bridging equity gaps across the city. So we're kind of showing how these local initiatives at Mosswood Park were sort of feeding back into sort of citywide initiatives for advancing equity. The icons that you see on the right-hand side are sort of scattered throughout the master plan. They sort of sit alongside different master plan initiatives to show that those particular proposals are support an equity goal, and also to show that there's sort of, you know, the intent is for whoever uses this document down the road should be prioritizing those equity goals in the implementation of the master plan, in, you know, future park programming and operations. I'll also add that the landscape and building improvements were really sort of the first step for an infrastructure to continue to implement these equity goals by the city departments that were running programs at the site. And this is the resultant master plan proposal. other than the kind of 3 buildings at the southwest corner of the park, what you'll notice is that really the master plan was about improving existing conditions, improving circulation, refreshing landscape, replacing out-of-date amenities. And as Sarah pointed to, it was really focused on reviving historic uses and creating opportunity and potential for new uses. I'll share some views of the project. This is the main entry at the north side. A welcoming, inviting main entry. Above the front door is a canvas for a future public artwork, ideally by an emerging local artist. The building is highly sustainable. Responding to the park context with a mass timber structure. And in conjunction with a future phase gym, the hope is that the 2 buildings could provide a community resiliency hub for the city of Oakland. Stepping inside the building on the 2nd floor, there's a lot of various program spaces, but this is a maker space on the 2nd floor, kind of building on that historic use of the Junior Rec Center, and also advancing equity goals around education and around bridging the digital divide by providing high quality STEAM programs out of this space. You can see that the color palette on the interior is more colorful. It's really meant to be a reflection of that community energy and creativity happening on the inside. And lastly, kind of zooming out back to, we're sitting on the baseball field now, looking back to the site. And you can see that the park, the trees, the landscape is still really the foreground and the focus. The community input was that this building wants to be sort of a background to our park. And so these high quality open spaces, indoor outdoor connections are really reframing and elevating what was already there. This image is kind of showing the potential for, public health improvements and that kind of fostering of neighborhood and civic life that was touched on in the equity goals. We broke ground last summer. We saw some friendly, familiar faces. It was an opportunity to come back together. The building construction is underway. And I just kind of wanted to end on the fact that, although we're building a building, this is bringing us back to the initial goals for the project, which was really to develop the building is just a vessel for people and for programs. And we really hope that the seeds that were planted through the engagement process have built, a cohort of users that feel sort of ownership and stewardship over the site. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mosswood team. That was so great. It's nice that we're getting to learn so much about this project also alongside you all. So lots of common threads to pick up on during the panel conversation. I'm going to just come back to this slide and reintroduce you to the India Basin team. So India Basin on this side, and just going to walk through, and then Catherine and I will present a little bit of an overview of the project. So Jackie Bryant in the center here from APRI San Francisco. They're a community organization in Hunters Point Bayview, and they were both wearing a couple different hats, which Jackie will tell you more about, sitting on the client side, but also on the community side. So really a hybrid and representing, I think, that a kind of different approach to designing for equity where the client and the community are starting to come together a lot more. Josh Silver from San Francisco Recreation and Parks, program manager and representing the client entity. And then Catherine List from GGN, landscape architect for the project and the prime consultant, and Emily Gossick, principal at Jensen Architects, and we were actually a sub-consultant to GGN in this case. So Catherine's going to give you an overview of the project, and then I'll talk a little bit about the architecture.
Thank you. Okay, yeah, I'm going to give you just an overview and then talk about the landscape a little bit as well. So first, I wanted to just acknowledge that it's been 25 years since the initial idea for this started, and that sparked really with the India Basin Neighborhood Association really identifying 900 Innis as a potential park space. And then in 2011, Rec and Park was able to actually purchase that property. And then we weren't really involved until the ideas competition, our initial concept. And then it wasn't until 2019 until we got kind of a bigger team together and really started the schematic design phase. And at that same time, we basically, Rec and Park recognized that there was a need to kind of deepen and broaden the engagement with the community. And so they worked with APRI to really identify the key leaders in the community and bring that group of leaders together to engage with us throughout our design process. And so right now, I'm excited to share, we're in construction of that first 900 Innis phase. And then after that, we'll be going into construction for the second phase, India Basin Shoreline Park. So our site is located on the southeast side of San Francisco. It is in the Bayview Hunters Point neighborhood. This is a low-income neighborhood. It's also a very young neighborhood. It's about, about twice as young as anywhere else in San Francisco and younger than 18 group. And then it's also our sites, 900 Innis and India Basin Shoreline Park, are really also connected regionally to the Bay Trail. So the 900 Innis site was a boatyard and actually held this existing, still existing historic shipwrights cottage on the site. And the amazing thing about this is that because of this boatyard history, there was some contaminated soils on site. And so this made the site inaccessible to the community for a really long time, and it was just fenced off. So through this remediation phase, which actually happened before our phase started, they were able to clean that material and cap it with clean material so that we could then start our construction phase. And then once that's completed, that will become a new park space that will be accessible again to this community. India Basin Shoreline Park is the second phase. It's 7.5 acres. It's an existing park that we're excited to renovate as part of this project. And in our initial concept, we really, when we were learning about the park, this was before we really deeply engaged with the community, we did identify that there was this disconnect to that history at the 900 Innis site. And then there's also this real kind of wide corridor that really separates the neighborhood that's quite close to the park, but really feels distant because of this vehicular barrier. So we wanted to really emphasize that connection through our concept image and share that with the community, and this really resonated with them. So as I mentioned, when we started our schematic design phase, really thanks to Rec and Park and APRI, they were able to find these key leaders in the community and really welcome them to come and engage with us on a real monthly basis throughout our design process. And so we were lucky enough to have, one of our design members actually attend all these meetings throughout schematic design, design development, construction documents even, and really hear, what was important to the park, but also to the community as a whole, because there were other goals. So these were the kind of 6 equitable development goals that came out of all those. We'll get into how long those conversations took place, but basically, these were the 6 goals that that group came up with, and a lot of them were part of what became the park, but some of them are continuing, just like with the Mosswood team, continuing to be part of the programs and the future of the park as it gets, once it gets constructed and actually utilized. So quickly, this is our proposed design rendering of our proposed design. 900 Innis is actually tucked into the corner there on the left, and then India Basin Shoreline Park is in the foreground here. So this is our complete site. We're looking at the main lawn down the center, which really brings people and connects them from the street all the way down to the water. The floating dock is slipping past that even further out towards us. This is going to be a place where people can rent boats at the boathouse and really pull them out and go out on the water and kayak. This was also really something that the community wanted to be able to have a safe place to go out on the water and learn about the water. And then in the tree line area, we have a cookout terrace, basketball courts, and a playground. And then this view on the bottom right is really looking in the opposite direction. So not from the water, we're now on the street side looking back down to the park. And we also heard there was a desire to have multiple scales of gathering spaces. So we have the lawn, which is a very flexible, large space. but there's also this desire to be able to create smaller gathering spaces. And a lot of folks, they just wanted a place to kind of be and, be seen and just experience the park, even if they had only a little bit of time, or maybe they just wanted to hang out and wait for their friends. So we created these porches that were just slipping right off from the sidewalk to allow you to be part of the park. And we had these swings so you could, really feel like you're part of the park, but you could just be there for a moment. And then the cookout terrace is another place that, in our, I think Shannon, our design lead, was telling me that in one of our first meetings that I wasn't there, but she had heard that folks were actually trying to understand how they could sign up for like a grill or a picnic table, even in those first community meetings. So we knew that that was really important as an element, but we didn't quite know how this was going to be integrated into the whole park design. And so again, through those deeper and longer conversations with the community leaders, we really understood, one of those goals about youth and family. And so how can we create not only a destination such as a cookout terrace, but really integrate it into the park so that you can feel like it's part of all the spaces. And so, a family could come to the cookout terrace and really spend the day there. And, the smaller kids could be out on the lawn and feel safe because they're directly connected to the cookout terrace. And then the older youth could be playing basketball. And so they still feel like, they can always come back to the cookout terrace to get some food. And so this is creating that kind of focus on youth activities, and but also bringing everyone together in this one park and in this one community.
Thanks, Catherine. So I'm going to focus on the buildings, and I'm going to focus on the 900 Innis Phase 1 site. Most of the buildings are there, and just share a little bit about the story of the buildings and how that's related to the Equitable Development Plan goals. And I'm going to start out just sharing a little bit about the history of the site, because really the parameters and the givens of the architecture were driven by the history. And so, as Catherine mentioned, the 900 Innis site was this former boatyard, and we had given to us through the EIR and the mitigation measures that the boatyard was considered a cultural landscape, and that there's qualities of that cultural landscape that we were seeking to recreate, some essence of that space that should remain. And so I love looking at the historic images, but especially this one, because seeing the boats there and thinking about the architectural quality of that, the boats really were these buildings that would kind of come and go in a way from the place. But you see the cluster of buildings along the water's edge, and the EIR describes it as this village-like quality that we were seeking to recreate. And so this is a view that was created early on, relatively early on, and shows really what we did end up creating. And on the left is the Shipwrights Cottage that Catherine mentioned. It's a landmark structure that is restored as part of the project. In the middle is the food pavilion, and on the right-hand side is the shop building. So I'm just going to focus on these three and tell you about what they're doing, what you're going to do in those spaces, and how that's connected to the Equitable Development Plan. And I like this image because you see also the neighborhood up, reaching up to the hill. So I wanted to say that we knew that there were going to be these relatively small structures. We knew that it was really important that folks could come down to the water and participate in activities there, but we didn't yet know what needed to happen there that would make this place really important and meaningful and active for the community. And we needed that collaboration and partnership with the community to understand all of that. It's not something that we could create on our own. I think something that's different with our project compared to the Mosswood project is that we didn't have the luxury of having a program that was developed before the architectural design started. So we were programming and designing at the same time. Not ideal, and required a lot of flexibility on everyone's part. And I think ultimately we've gotten to some really good conclusions, but there was a lot of evolution along the way. We started out with small structures to begin with, so there wasn't a lot that was that changeable, but you'll see here. So on the Shipwrights Cottage, we again had this really tiny little cottage that was built by one of the first shipwrights of the boatyard, and will be restored. So a lot of those parameters were given. We also knew from the EIR that we needed to do some interpretation of that history, and so this was a natural place to do that. It's also important, I think, that the Shipwrights Cottage is right on the street, and so there was an opportunity to make the street safer by creating that sense of presence. and in a building that had been abandoned for a very long time. So we wanted to strike a balance between interpretation and activation. And we went through a lot of different scenarios, including a potential cafe there and other kinds of community uses, and have now tried to balance some of those things. And I'll give you a sneak peek in a second. And then on the lower level of the Shipwrights Cottage, again, through this cultural lens of the equitable development plan, there was a lot of conversation about what would be a meaningful use for this space. And ultimately, it's going to be a classroom for technology for youth. So really focusing on the youth opportunities piece of the plan. So this is looking at the upstairs of the Shipwrights Cottage, and there we're locating all of the different artifacts that were found during the remediation process that Catherine showed, as well as some artifacts that will be on loan from the Maritime Museum, and other things like telling the story of the community that is there today. So trying to balance, again, the storytelling of what happened before and the storytelling of what is happening now, and making space for kids to come in and be part of the space and have it be an active space, not just a passive space to go through. And then in the food pavilion, this was really our opportunity to address the workforce and economic development part of the plan in terms of programming the buildings themselves. And in this case, we were looking at food programming. And so we thought in the beginning that there would be some kind of food concession, but there was a lot of exploration of what that would look like. Everything from sort of food stalls where folks would bring prepared food in and try to sell it on the site, to ultimately what we landed on, which was a full commercial kitchen. And the idea of that came through the leadership committee's guidance, as well as the core partners, and really thinking that there was a goal here to develop a business that could thrive here and not be dependent on a commissary kitchen or something external. And so there is going to be a full commercial kitchen with all of the equipment installed, and we figured out what should be there and how folks would want to operate that kitchen through a focus group that was led by N2 Action, which is another community outreach entity in the Bayview Hunters Point. And that group was able to tell us a couple things. One was that we needed to make a space that one person could operate by themselves, because we weren't necessarily going to have staff to begin with. And then they even told us very specific kinds of equipment that they wanted to have in the space, because we wanted to make it a place that actual proprietors of food businesses in Bayview Hunters Point could come in and operate how they wanted to. And then lastly, the shop building, which is on the pier and roughly in the site of a paint shop that was on the project historically. And always thought of this as there was a thought originally that there would be some kind of maker use, but again, flexibility was paramount. So we went through a lot of different scenarios of what would happen out here. And ultimately, RPD now has partnered with Rocking the Boat, which is an organization that's located on the East Coast. And they're going to open up a new operation here in India Basin. They're going to be doing boat building and kind of construction skills, woodworking skills, as well as maritime skills. So they'll be teaching people how to be safe on the water. And you'll be able to potentially build a boat and then actually sail it from the pier, which is kind of mind-blowing. We're super excited. So that is the end of the show on India Basin, and we just wanted to say how thrilled we are that the park will be open very soon, and we'll be able to welcome all these folks who've been working so long and hard on this project to be able to come and enjoy the space. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to Lydia, and she's going to take us through the panel.
So wow, so many things going on in each of these parks, right? So as I was looking at the parts where we were talking about the equity plan for each park, I was struck by the fact that each one had like its own set of like equity goals, right? So for example, in Mosswood, you have advancing education, improving public health, fostering civic life, and then there were the 6 things for India Basin, right? And so I in my mind I was thinking, oh, you start with an equity plan and then it's already set and then you involve the community. But it sounds like it's actually I had it backwards, that it's more like you really do a deep involvement with the community and then you develop the equity goals in collaboration with the community. Do I have that more or less right? Okay, got it. So I'm interested because I think we're using equity as a shorthand for it to mean a lot of different things here. So I wonder, just to like make it a little bit more concrete, did your team start out with other existing models as well when you were thinking about equity? Maybe the San Francisco team wants to take it on.
All right. Hi, everybody. Um, did we start with other models? Yes, we did. Good question. So there's a project in Washington, D.C. Called the 11th Street Bridge Park. If you're in D.C., it's not under construction yet, but they have an equitable development plan. And is not to go into the weeds, but as this plan in India Basin was being developed, the equitable development plan, um, it was recognized by Jackie and other community members who were going to what was a typical rec and park meeting, building a park, and that we had to do business a little bit differently in this case. And that's a real short way of the Cliff Notes version. But um, there's this project in DC, and they had an equitable development plan, and this project started to look to that plan as a way to sort of generate and do business differently, which was coming up with these goals that your areas of focus or goals that you saw on the screen earlier. I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, I would just add that, part of working in this community meant that we had to define equity with the community. And so, as Lydia was saying, we kind of use that word as a catch-all. And what we had to do was define it with community members so that we were speaking the same language when it came to building equity through this park project.
Do you guys want to, the Oakland team?
All right. Can you hear me now? Okay. Yeah. So, the interesting thing for Oakland is that in 2017, the city of Oakland established a new department called the Department of Race and Equity. I think there may be some precedents, but it's a pretty new idea. But it had this goal that we as a city would embed equity, an equity lens in all of our decision making, all of our policies throughout the city. And so, there were some tools that were generated pretty quickly out of that. Dominique and Sarah pointed to a couple of them. The GIS-based dashboard sort of is an interactive tool that uses demographic data to locate priority neighborhoods, and it was developed by the Department of Transportation as a way to prioritize projects based on the highest need neighborhoods. The equity indicators report was also generated around that time, and the kind of the themes of our equity goals were really established by that. And that was a sort of a look citywide at Oakland at disparities and identifying these kind of key areas or themes of disparity within the city specifically. And then I think, the role of the engagement was to put objectives or specific site specific goals to those greater themes and sort of work with the community on how we as a project could implement this. And again, I think it's important to note it's the vessel of the building, but it's also the program that will occur in that building. So really engaging with the department, the Oakland Parks and Rec and Youth Development is the program operator for the park. They have a long history of working in that park, and we actually used a lot of their data about who uses their programs for summer, summer and after school. And just as Sarah was pointing to the map about, it's not necessarily contiguous to the park, kids from schools in East and West Oakland are often the ones using the programs in the park. So I think recognizing that and really integrating that into the decision making was really important for us.
Yeah, I would agree. You guys hear me okay? So I feel like it was a hybrid, right? So I think the intention of equity was always there from the start. And that showed up in the way that we sort of built our team, right? And so Sarah mentioned this beautiful word. I hate propinquity, right? This idea of nearness, right? And I think all of us sitting here had our own sort of experience with nearness, right? Me being an Oakland native and resident and someone who had actually spent time as a young person at Mosswood Park, actually working in the park, cleaning up trash as part of my first job when I was 15, right? And then you also have Christine, who lives right near the park. We've Sarah, who lives within close proximity, has been in Oakland for over 20 years, raised a family. And then Dominique, who's a little bit newer to the city of Oakland, but still has this close relationship with this sort of regional space. So I feel like even our own perspectives, bringing those to the project was really our way of trying to be intentional about like representing these different types of voices that may be part of this process. The other thing too is that I feel like the community was so engaged and so outspoken that if we got it wrong, they would let us know, which we welcomed, right? And then in terms of like what other models we looked at, we actually looked at some very local models of community engagement. Rainbow Rec Center is an example of one. And Rainbow Rec Center is located in East Oakland. And that rec center had just recently been renovated and had this pretty robust community engagement program as part of the design process. But the really cool thing about like looking at a Rainbow Rec Center, not only were we looking at the programming and the design of the spaces, we also spent a lot of time talking to the folks who work in the space, right? Who help to maintain the space, who build out programming, making sure that those voices were represented as well.
Great. So in the Mosswood slides, I noticed that one where it shows that like yellow beam of gentrification beaming down on the park. And so I was wondering, it sounded like that being aware that gentrification already happened, that you made a deliberate attempt to kind of go outside the sort of the official radius of the park and try and reach out to other further out, assuming that people had moved away. Were there other things that were kind of designed to kind of counter, green displacement or anti-gentrification?
So I think one of the things that we did, and Sarah, I think pointed out some of this work, was we were really intentional about like meeting people where they were. So like really being present at local events, but not just saying, hey, we're working on this project, but really spending that time actually doing data collection and really talking to folks. And even if the extent of our conversation was, hey, this project is happening, right? There's this opportunity to have your voice heard, but if you're not able to be an active participant, we at least want you to know that this facility is being renovated, right? One of the things that we talked about significantly through the process was really trying to address over programming of spaces, right? So thinking about like Oakland, like with San Francisco, has all of these amazing gyms, right? And you're talking about green space, right? And we all love to enjoy them, but there are certain spaces within the city of Oakland that are heavily utilized. And you understand why, because they're beautiful. But then we also have access to East Bay Regional Parks and all these other spaces that in some instances have some access issues. But we also wanted to say, hey, this project is happening. Mosswood, it's like Prince said, sexy never left, right? Mosswood has been active even in the midst of like arson and functioning out of portables, right? There was still like this huge invested community there that was keeping the work going. So part of this project too was just to say, hey, we know you love Lake Merritt, right? It's a beautiful space, but we also have this gem of a space smack dab in the middle of Oakland called Mosswood Park. And so how can we share the love and be gentle on our ecosystems? How can we think of creative ways collectively to utilize those spaces? So I think we were all trying to like really make sure that the love was spread a little bit more evenly, I guess. Hope that answers your question.
So for the San Francisco side, thinking about, gentrification, this is a new park, right? For the most part, it's, there may be some gentrification issues with creating a fancy new park there.
Well, similar to Mosswood, India Basin Shoreline Park exists, but we kind of call it an underserved park. There's issues like there's no permanent bathroom that exists. So the park as it is not really a space that you could have a great experience. It's a very quick experience, a very passive experience. But because it was such an active space already, especially through our pandemic, we did very similar strategies of listening to community and understanding, well, what does this community want in this space? And how will we activate it with community, as opposed to if the city builds something, we just expect people to come. And I think that was one key reason why the design team was selected, was because they really thought about drawing the hillside, what we call folks on the hill, into the park. And if anyone knows about the sort of the history of that neighborhood, a good majority of the housing there are historic barracks that used to serve the naval shipyard that were converted into public housing. So we have the highest density of concentrated poverty and low-income families right along that shoreline. And as this project came along, you know, one of the first questions that came from community members is, why y'all coming here now? You know, like, we've been here all this time. We've been resilient through very difficult times in this city, and no one had worried about us before. So as this park project moves forward, it's very important that we continue to have conversations with community about how it impacts them. And our equitable development strategies are all the way outside of the comfort zone of what Rec and Park normally does. We talk a lot about how we approach this project differently, but one of the key things, as opposed like talking about housing security and how a $200 million investment can destabilize the community and cause so many concerns of people that live there now, that, you know, we actually develop strategies to continue to reinvest in community, help support, you know, first-time home buyership, and working with our city, that includes our mayor's office of housing and community development, so that we can provide as much opportunities and accessibility to the programs to help stabilize the neighborhood as opposed to destabilize it.
Got it. So since community engagement is such a huge part of you know, making these parks for the community, can you talk a little bit about, you know, what worked and what didn't work from each side? How about we have Mosswood go?
Well, I want to just add one thing, which is I actually think community engagement should always be plural. I was talking to someone else about this, that it's communities, because in fact, particularly at Mosswood, there's like an incredible community who has a punk rock show in the park. There's a community who has carnival in the park. There's a community who plays basketball. There's a community who goes there, and they're all communities, and some of them are in community with one another, but not all of them. And so I think part of the strategy of community engagement at Mosswood was not to think of community as a monolithic one, but as this very woven fabric of people. And that was important. And just a shout out really to Charmin, when we started, there had been a donation like GoFundMe set up where you could put your email in if you want to give money to support the rebuilding of the rec center. But the infrastructure, like they hand you this, they say, go talk to the community, you've got the project. There wasn't like a database. There is the work to be ready to do this project wasn't robust, right? The RAC is this incredible local organization, and there's an incredibly dedicated small group of people who are leading it. But so a lot of our work was the Recreation Advisory Committee. A lot of our work was to actually get phone numbers, get emails, start building a listserv, start talking to people. And when we were done, one of our deliverables was this database actually of the communities, and that didn't exist when we started. And so I think there's a funny thing of like, community exists, but like we all have to really work at it all the time, and it goes away. And that piece of building the communication is huge to making it work.
Add on to that a little bit. So just to kind of invert, like instead of looking backwards at how the community engagement was conducted, like we're talking about it in the present. And I mean, being present is really critical. You can't underestimate, undervalue just being present in space in terms of how you engage with community. And we have something out at the site now, which is a shipping container called the Community Innovation Lab. It was a long journey for us to get it out there, but it's there. It has electric, it has some heaters, it's cool when you're out by the bay. Jackie's team is actually staffing Just by being present out there, just today, I was talking with Louis, who's on your team, and he was going down the list of how many people, by being out there 4 hours yesterday, met just coming, or the other day, coming out to the park. And then just in the last month, as much as we try and we do a lot of activations, programming, and different things out of the site, just in the last month, because of being present out there every single day or almost every single day, there's been a new Learn to Bike program that sort of just popped up out there with the YMCA, and they became a partner. And we're engaging with youth in a different way than we've done before. There's every Sunday, there's a group that goes out there over 40 years old called the Over 40 Double Dutch Group. And now they're out there, people are out there getting, healthy for their minds, their bodies, all these different things. And we didn't even know they were out there. And we're like, wow, you're out here. Yeah, we're out here every Sunday, right? So they're bringing more people. We're doing another initiative with actually an Oakland-based organization called Hip Hop for Change. And Hip Hop for Change is doing something called Hip Hop in the Park, and it's using kind of the different methods and tenets of hip hop to engage youth in particular. They're out there. They started talking to the Double Dutch team, and now they want to. I need to tell you about this. They now want to do something about this together. There's someone else who we met with today that like, I didn't even really know this park project was happening. And then somebody's like, hey, come down. There's this thing called the lab. They took a look at the lab, and they're going to bring a sewing program, the community sewing program out there that is about like sewing things that are like representative of community culture, things from people's homes, all these different things. This is all just in the last 4 weeks. All these things have happened in addition to all the other things. So just being present in a space with, and knowing that people can come to that space and someone's there is really important.
So for the city representatives, having gone through this whole process, like, do you see yourself, do you think this is like standard operating procedure for you now when you have to design something? Like,
I mean, I have to say this was sort of the perfect project. And I think, Sharman had it right. I think everybody on the design team, myself, we were all totally committed to this project. And I also think, to Sarah's point about the communities, I think we were a little worried that there'd be these competing visions, right? But what became really apparent is that because Mosswood Park is such an amazing place, people really recognize its sort of magical quality and that it's this green oasis with the mature trees. And so we found it pretty easy to achieve consensus. I mean, we were looking at different building sites and it was unanimous, I think. Everybody agreed where the building should be. And I think that's because everybody sort of came along the journey, but also understood sort of the shared values of the park. That is not always the case. So I don't know. I mean, I've certainly learned a lot about the importance of building trust early in the project. Don't let it get off the rails, really be sure that you're listening closely from the very beginning. I've seen other projects, within the city not go so well. And I think a lot of it has to do with that just intention of showing up. That's a huge part of it. But yeah, it was a pretty magic project.
Yeah, I think that about us, this one works. Numbers on me. Okay, thank you. I can chime in about that. So what I was going to add is that, I think as a department, as Rec and Park Department, we are starting to think about doing business a little bit differently. We have another project underway at Buchanan Street Mall in the Western Addition of San Francisco that's going to go through a very extensive renovation. And my colleague who's leading that, project managing that, has thought about, how do you take the India Basin Equitable Development Plan model and maybe break down pieces of it and apply it to the Buchanan Street Mall. And so it's definitely expanded our thinking by having this equitable development plan on this. I'd also say that we are always giving webinars, invited to panels like this, locally, regionally, nationally, for various things, because we are now a best practice in terms of equitable development. We are the only city park department, to my knowledge. I ask this every time I do one of these things and no one's told me otherwise. So if you have, Ken, go ahead. But we the only city department Rec and Park Department that has an equitable development plan. There's many others out there. We're part of other partnerships with other parks across the city, or excuse me, across the country that do this. But it's so we're definitely, this is driving us to think differently as a department.
So for the designers then, I want to know like a little bit like how was it managing like all this extra input, I'm assuming, from these engagement with multiple communities? You know, how was it?
Well, I mean, we definitely, I feel like when we started, it's working. Yeah, okay. Couldn't you- when we started, there was definitely what I felt a little bit more of a typical process where we were doing a lot more of those um, kind of larger events and trying to gather data. I mean, that was certainly important and, part of that process as well. But I think what was unique for me in this was really that, like I mentioned, like having one of our design team members part of all the conversations and really listening. And I think that goes back to your point and your point as well, is like being present, being there, and having it be consistent and like really building relationships with these people, with these communities, and getting to know them on a deeper level than effectively like the data. I don't want to just say that because it's not important, but it's both. It needs to be both because there's different ways that different people engage also. So just being able to even hear people's stories about the park informs the design in kind of a more intuitive way that I think is something new that we experience.
I just wanted to add one thing, and Catherine makes a really great point that in the very beginning, it seemed like any other design charrette where you have people put your little marker, what you like the best, or write down what activity you like the best. And one of the things I really wanted to impress on the entire project team at that time is just imagine who's coming out to those meetings, right? If you're email blasting and, you're casually putting up flyers to say, hey, come out, there's this park meeting. In a community like Baby Hunters Point, that's not going to interest anybody, right? Many of the families that raise children in the community, we had to do exactly what we were hearing, which is meeting people where they were and making sure that the people that came to speak at those things actually represented the community that this park will serve. So we actually hit a hard reset, and that was when the partnership that included my organization came in. And it's so interesting to hear that we're also the client, but also, the the community, because we are both. And I had to actually kind of like put my foot down and say, hey, if community is not at the table having these conversations and we're not seeing the people that I know of that need to be in these community meetings, this is serving no one. And these kayaks are going to go to some really great people that ain't from this community. So we had to think about who were coming out to these meetings, and then we had to make it such that the voices that helped actually create the vision of that future park spoke to the histories and the experiences and the growth that the community has gone through several generations. So I think that's where we got that really rich piece of the park project, and moved the design along a little bit further. But it was also a really great active communication with community to say, hey, we're listening, we're hearing what you've said, and we've baked a lot of what we've heard into the design and the future programming.
I'll add for Mosswood that we shared that kind of engagement plan, and what that plan was showing is kind of two parallel timelines. There's the engagement timeline, and just underneath that is kind of the design and master planning timeline. And it was very kind of, those two timelines were developed in parallel to each other to sort of create a feedback loop. So every kind of workshop had then a design outcome that was going to feed into the design, and then that design outcome was going to feed into the next workshop. And so it was a project that built upon itself. And so it was a really kind of wonderful experience in terms of developing a design. And I've been involved in the opposite type of project, and that is a very frustrating experience.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to add to that, and also what Jackie said is the difference between the boards and the dot exercise feedback and what the design team and the client team can do with that, and the storytelling and the commitment and the partnership of this group, of the leadership group, to me also, you can feel it in the way that the team behaves and the way that the client team behaves, just with so much more confidence of like, we know what the community wants. It's very clear. And we didn't have to debate things as much once we had that information in that partnership.
Yeah, I was just going to make a plug that I think the community engagement is part of the creative process and part of the design process, and that it shouldn't be, you're inventing something that's right for the circumstance that you're in. And hopefully you've never done it exactly that way before, and you're trying something new and you're learning. And so I feel like when we did the process, a lot of the sort of design opportunity in it started with like, well, could we make a graphic that captures what we're hearing about the importance of the basketball court? Could we come up with a way to get this information? And that creative effort in the master planning process, which is more what we presented, was taken seriously as a design project, I guess I would say. And I think that sometimes doesn't happen, but that really like led us forward in terms of the work.
So finally, for the client community representatives, community client representatives, how do you think that how did the design ultimately turn out? Do you feel like it is an accurate representative of what the communities collectively wanted?
Yeah, I absolutely do. And this sort of is connected to what Sarah just mentioned. That sort of like effort to make sure that the community was involved at every step of the way. They were designers, they were think partners, they were folks who helped us start with our mission for the community engagement program. I think that was like echoed even within our team, right? So my background is I'm a civil engineer, but I was brought on this project as a community engagement consultant, right? And so I think my role didn't just stop as community engagement consultant. I was part of the master planning portion of the project. When we narrowed down the different design options, I was also included in that meeting, and vice versa. The sort of like continuum of the full sort of picture was represented throughout the project. And I think I sort of heard you guys echoing that same sort of sentiment, that the work didn't just stop when we got through the 6 workshops, right? There's still work happening in Indian Basin. And we actually spoke about something similar just the other day, about how just as those communities were effectively creating activations prior to our work, right? The work that we've done is just another way to sort of keep that momentum going. So all of these things that are growing out of the work that we're doing will continue. So I think the project was very successful. I think that people felt heard. Obviously, there's areas where that we could improve, but I think if we're talking about went well, I think a lot went well, and I think we modeled collectively some really great strategies and approaches to really connecting more with communities.
And add a little, oh, sorry. I wanted to add a little anecdote because the workshops, we did have a sequence of workshops and they ended, but I think what allowed that community input into the design process to happen was the Recreation Advisory Committee, which is a standing, group that meets on a regular basis about all kinds of things that have to do with the park. And we came to them regularly to show the design. And I don't know if you guys remember, I mean, there were some moments where they had some really good insights into the design, even when we were further along. And the design team did an excellent job of listening and not being afraid to make changes. I remember the column in the dance floor. They figured out a way to get rid of that column, because the community said, hey, it's not a dance floor if there's a column there. So I think that was really excellent.
And yeah, I would also agree that our park design has really been a vision of community voices. And I'll just make a note that part of our equitable development plan was, one, anchoring identity into the space. So that's something that we actively have to ensure continues to happen through construction. And when construction is done, we want you to know where you are and how proud and beautiful this piece of the city is. And the other thing is, we didn't just stop with saying that this is the vision. We included a workforce development program to get folks from community through apprenticeship trades program so they could be tradesmen and women to actually build this park. And even one step further in hosting meet and greets with the potential general contractors and much of the hyperlocal contractors that are in the community. These are small businesses that have historically felt like they didn't have access to big city projects. So we went a step further in making sure that we used a lot of these investments to intentionally hire subcontractors that inevitably would hire more community members. So this park is truly being built by the hands of community members. And you'll talk to some of the construction trades workers out there right now, and they're just so proud and they get to tell the stories, but they also get to look back 10 years from now at a space that they, with their own hands, created, and their children and their children's children can be so proud of creating that space. So it's not just the vision, it's the actual creation of the space is done by community members.
So now we're going to move into the question and answer portion. So if someone has a question, please raise your hand. I'll bring the mic over. Okay.
Hello. Yeah, hi. It's been so wonderful to hear all of your insight that you all have collected in these two parallel projects. And I was curious to hear what would be like a summarizing sentence that you would give yourself at the start of this project with the insight that you have now.
I'm not sure if it's a summarizing sentence, but I will say that one thing that I think I would start a project like this with next time is to also involve the community in the community engagement strategy, right? Because people receive information differently. There's different access points. Some people are visual, some are not. And I feel like our approach was definitely well received, but I also think that there was probably some other things that might have been unearthed if they were part of even that process.
I was just going to say that we don't always have the chance to do this, but I think where we do, to advocate for more time at the beginning, way before the design process starts, to connect with community, figure out who community is, or who the communities are. And I think, again, hearing about the Mosswood story and the master planning, it seems like that was a luxury that you all had, that we don't often have, because it's very hard to connect with community after the design process has already started and we're bringing things that are kind of pre-cooked and asking for sign off, whereas we really need to have that deeper learning process, even about who the community is in the first place, to know who to ask and where those conversations even start. So I think it's a luxury of time that we don't always have, but it's really important. And I think it's, to Christine's point, really important to setting the groundwork so that you get off on the right foot.
I guess for me, and I can't speak for my rec and park department, but at least from the community perspective, it was more like keep pushing. It was there are moments where we can celebrate and we have these really great things that everybody touts and they're like, oh, we had so many people come out and these are awesome things that we're having. But we also have times where it was challenging, where we really had to sit down and think through how we were going to solve some of the things that had come up. And kayaking is a good example because, like I was saying in the very beginning, there's a lot of people that put dots next to kayaking because that seems like a reasonable water activity that you could do right off of a pier. Makes a lot of sense. But when it came down to community members, and I mean, honestly, when I first floated kayaking to some people, they was like, that's not for us. That's just not for us. And so we really had to think about, well, how do we make sure that it's inviting to the existing community, right? We can't forget the history of when Black folks couldn't even go to public pools. So we really thought about that, and our rec and park department said, duh, we are the rec and park department. There's a pool right down the street. While we're building this park project, let's make sure that we invite all the kids in the neighborhood from all the different schools to actually go through swimming lessons. And that in turn helped educate parents about water safety. So when the park is built, we're not just saying, hey, come on out to the water, but people feel comfortable coming out to the water. They feel welcomed to coming out to the water, right? So again, it's like, keep pushing, because yes, there'll be all these great moments that you can celebrate and the news will come out. But when all that dust settles, like, what is the park after that? It is continued work, making sure that community is participating and they love their space. They're going to continue to love on it as we pour as much as we can into it. So just keep on pushing.
Hello, my name is Mariana, and my comment is for the India Basin team. Um, I'm I just want to like say that that's really cool that you guys are working on it. I was a baby resident for a long time, and it's just really cool to see it being developed. I've always wondered, what if this could be there, or um, so I guess I have propinquity to Bayview since I moved away. So I just, yeah, yeah, I just keep on thinking about it, and I'm excited to, to visit it. And I guess my question is, y'all have developed something that's accessible to youth, and it's going to be a place where everybody could have like a connection with the ecology that they, haven't had for such a long time. Is there opportunity, or do you guys see opportunity for other ways to access or to have the community grow out there? Like, I don't know, like commercial spaces, or what what else could happen there?
Yeah, so we do have a small food pavilion where a entrepreneur can come in and use this commercial kitchen. We're looking at different models of how to use it, because the existing street is not a commercial corridor. So it's not the most inviting location for an existing business to come in, because they won't get very much business until the entire shoreline piece develops out. So there are opportunities for small entrepreneurs. We host a series of different fairs, market type fairs for small entrepreneurs, again, to come on site. I talked a little bit about the contractors that actually do get access to building on site that allows them to get more projects underway, and they can parlay that into more opportunities throughout the city. They also learn how to work through our DPW process of bidding on some of these different contracts and things like that. But we're also with the lab learning about ways to invite our nonprofits in, because we know that the community does a lot of really great work already. There's a ton of youth services. There's a ton of environmental justice organizations that have been doing really great work in the community. And we want to start to bring everybody down to create a hub so that we can begin to share a lot of these different programs and opportunities that come through the park. So there's so much baked into bringing a space together that creates that. And I think our lab, part of the reason why we call it the lab is because it's sort of a testing ground to see what works, what doesn't work, what we might want to think about improving, and how we can leverage this $200 million investment back into the community by helping some of these nonprofits grow. So, part of that 200 million, we've already earmarked 15 of the 200 million to go directly into these equitable development strategies and hopefully directly right back into community and nonprofits to stabilize and continue to help support all the really great work that's happening in community. So many fun things. I can't even.
I can add on just a little bit. I mean, what's really interesting about this project is, as I said, we're doing business a little bit differently in how we as a Parks Department operate, and it's because of some of our partners in the Equitable Development Plan. But we're using this park for financial literacy. For example, we had a year-long pilot program that'll be concluding later this year, where we partnered with the city's Office of Financial Empowerment to offer financial coaching to individuals and families in District 10 or Bayview Hunters Point. And things that we take for granted that are barriers to employment, for example, like credit or homeownership or rental. And so that's another example of a program they're extending. Another thing too, just to go back to engagement for a second, I should have thought of this. we just launched in the beginning of 2024 an artist in residence program. It's a partnership with the San Francisco Arts Commission, where we're embedding 2 artists from the community and a professional curator into the project. And what what arts is so successful at doing, as probably many of you know, is engaging differently and bringing different voices into a project. And so instead of us holding hey, we're going to bring people down and we're going to do artwork, which we've done and it's been successful. It's how do we embed these artists in here who have a connection already with the community? They're going to be the boots on the ground, or their eyes and ears. They're going to supplement the engagement that we're already doing. And so that's a little bit something different too for a parks department.
Cool, thanks.
Hi, my name is Bruce. So I've been thinking quite a bit lately about progress and how it's a very, I'm a progressive, but it seems historically progress often leads to a certain percentage of the population feeling threatened, which is obviously happening now in our country in some ways that aren't very attractive and are a little frightening. But for these 2 projects, they're interesting to me because one is very much India Basin is kind of a community that's been isolated and maybe forgotten and a little bit disregarded for a very long time. And now it's getting some attention, long overdue. Whereas Mosswood is very much in the heart of a variety of different sorts of demographics and social standings. And I can see where in both of these, there could be people who feel threatened by these projects, both for the gentrification. You put in this beautiful park, you're going to have all these well-to-do people wanting to move in and move into these tangential neighborhoods. Whereas India Basin feels a little more isolated, and so maybe it's not quite so likely that I'm going to decide I want to move out to Hunters Point because there's this beautiful new park. And I'm just curious how it's going to be a little difficult for you both to talk about it, but like how much pushback you've gotten from the people who are nervous about this progress and how maybe they're not going to be able to keep up. From Mosswood, which is very much more diverse sort of surrounding neighborhood, versus India Basin, which is, I would imagine, maybe a little more homogenous.
I can talk to that a little bit. I mean, I'll tell you a story. The first community meeting, there was this really wonderful community group, and they offered to make sandwiches for everyone, and they were the pickleball group. And they were advocating that we should change the existing basketball courts into pickleball courts. That's what they wanted. And they were going to make the sandwiches. And I think what was great about the conversation and the really sort of sharing of information and sharing of stories is they were a terrific person who was actually doing great things, who had absolutely no idea where they were. And so I think what I have a lot of faith in is that if you can get people to actually be connected to one another and in relationship to one another, people are pretty good, and like they're willing to work together and find ways forward that are as respectful and appropriate, and actually often serving the underdog and the person who might not have as much power. So at least in my experience, the gentrification has already happened around a lot of Mosswood, but the spirit of the community was very much a spirit of care, coming from everyone kind of in all directions. And that actually includes the unhoused community, who was a big part of our process as well, not as a let's go now talk to the unhoused community, but as a people who were living in the park came to our events, participated in conversations, played with our models with us, and had some really good ideas about what was needed. And so I don't know. I think one of the big things we lack is being in relationship to one another, and that's the space where there's a lot of potential for people to do good things. And that's really, that's what I've seen work, I guess, at Mosswood.
Yeah, I would just add on to that just a little bit, just to know that in our workshops and throughout the process, we had a representative who's a longtime coach of tennis classes that took place, weekly at the Mosswood tennis courts. We also have representatives for folks who had started like a community garden space. And then there's so many other examples of people who, you know, were existing sort of community members who had activations ongoing. So making sure that they were part of the conversation and that they were reassured that those programs weren't going to go away. And they were like, they were very vocal about kind of like when we were thinking about where the building should be located, like making sure that these were safe spaces, these were protected spaces. And I think everyone was in agreement with that, even folks who were new to Mosswood, because there was this a fair amount of work, and a lot of this was part of the Einwheeler Keel team, was to really dig deeply into the history of the park. And because everyone who were at these events saw that timeline, it's a little bit hard to walk in there and say like, hey, let's tear it all down, right? So I think just making sure that from the very beginning, we sort of, in the best way possible, we got everyone on the same page about like why the park is a gem, and who lives there, and why it's important to for us to be keepers of that history and that legacy.
That question gets asked a lot, but thank you for asking it. And, you know, as I was sitting here listening, I share some of the similar things as it relates to India Basin, and I was thinking of 16 different ways to, you know, answer that question, because there's no great way to do it. But I think one of the things, having an equitable development plan, is that the plan itself acknowledges displacement. It doesn't shy away from it. It's front and center in there. It says it, you know, that change is inevitable. There is a lot of change that's actually happening, that despite the park being, you know, renovated and a new park being built, there's a lot of development around there. There's the Hunters Point shipyard that has a future. There's a large scale development that is literally adjacent to the park, that is going to bring a lot of new housing units in there. And there's been a lot of integration and thought about how to connect the two spaces, this India Basin Park with the new development. But, you know, it's really about, you know, ensuring that the community has a seat at the table. It's helping the community. The community kind of didn't even need an equitable development plan. They're doing equitable development, right? That's what and this is a way for them to amplify the things that they're doing, right? And because, as Jackie was saying, this investment that we're making as part of this project, we're able to help provide that avenue and help them amplify these things. And so I think by involving them in this, it's a mitigation measure. It's not going to prevent displacement. I'm a firm believer in that, but it's going to help mitigate some of these things.
One more question?
Yeah, hi, Greg from Lenny Mae MCC Architects. Just follow up for Sarah or a bunch of you. Really love the comment about communities and communities plural, and just kind of maybe following up on some of these comments about, for example, pickleball. And I know Rec Park has a lot of pickleball issues going on and trying to solve that, but communities are plural, and the idea of equity and trying to balance out different needs in a community, and just recognizing that it's messy. Not everyone gets what they want, right? And there's got to be a decider. So I'd kind of like to hear more about how in your groups, how maybe people didn't get what they want and how you reconciled that. Yeah, move forward.
Yeah, and I will say, I think one of the big parts of Mosswood was actually there was in my mind, a client who couldn't speak, and that was the trees. And this sounds really corny, but there are these incredible old trees that were at risk of too much development actually in the park, or too big buildings, or all these things. And so we were in an interesting conversation with people around how much could you add to the park? And we actually first tried to take some things away, and the community advocated to put everything back. I mean, the plans, we didn't really present our design for the park, more the master plan, but the plans are very similar with some big changes in circulation and some smaller scale things. But what's interesting is the thing that everybody could hold in common was it was really important to keep the trees healthy. And we talked a lot about critical root zones and things like that. And that became a way to talk about this question of limit, I guess I would say, and what are the most important things to have in this place, and thinking, well, we already have a pool at Studio One, we have an art center there, and mapping things so we could figure out, like, we don't need one of those here because we have it there and it's pretty close by. And so there was just a really healthy conversation about the idea of limit and empty space and not crowding as a real asset to the park, which then opened up a question of values, which everybody could participate in. And I think it was just being honest that made it go pretty well.
Yeah, I think that especially some of the kind of participatory workshops towards the end where we were doing the site planning exercises, that the kind of in the moment consensus building really kind of laid the groundwork for the outcomes that would be presented at the following meetings. And so it's kind of having people work in teams, disparate teams get created with like people of different viewpoints coming together at the same table, and then having those groups present to the entire group, having everyone come up in front of the whole room and present back what was shared, so that everyone is really listening to each other in small groups and a larger group. And at the end of the meetings, you're kind of summarizing what you heard. And I think that kind of active consensus building in the moment is really important and kind of lays the groundwork for an understanding of how the decisions are made and the things that were implemented and the things that sort of were not implemented and couldn't make it into the design.
I think that one of the things that I noticed was it felt like sort of at the end of the sort of process of what's going to live at Mosswood, most folks were pretty pleased with what was presented. I think the challenges were around the timing of seeing those things realized. Money, right? So I think most people were like, yes to that, yes to this. You know, this feels like it would be a mutual benefit for those, for all, you know, different types of users. But it was like, when can we have the thing, right? And I think most folks were all on the same page about, like, we really need a rec center, like, more than anything else at this point, you know? So I think it really helped to sort of drive decision making around kind of how to prioritize the phasing of the projects, and how to spend the energy in terms of any additional fundraising and so forth. And Christine could probably speak more to that. But also I think, you know, we did have some things along the way. Like there were some folks who wanted a dog park, right? And right, and felt strongly about that, right? But I think, to Sarah's point about like creating relationships and openly having dialogues about why that may not have been the best idea for Mosswood Park. Even the folks who were fierce advocates were like, you know, I can get on board with that. That kind of makes sense. So I feel like, you know, nothing is ever perfect, but I mean, I'm going to go ahead and pat us all on the back. I think we did a pretty good job of, you know, of calming the waters and as best as we could working through those sort of challenges.
All right, so on that note, I think we're coming close to our allotted time. So let's give a round of applause for our amazing panel. And then I think people will stick around for a little bit if you want to collar them individually and ask them more questions. So anyway, thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Lydia.